thanks everyone for being here today. We are excited to have Ulyana giving a seminar for us. And I'm just going to give a little intro about her. Ulyana is currently the head of communications at the NC CASC, and she holds a PhD in geological sciences from CU Boulder with a specialty in glaciology, as well as a master's in geological sciences from Brown and a bachelor's in earth science and geology from Rice. Prior to this position, she was a research associate at the Alaska Climate Research Center at University of Alaska Fairbanks and a visiting professor at Colorado College. And she currently is a Voices for Science ambassador for AGU. And she's a prolific science communicator. She's written a multi-part blog for Scientific American while on a Fulbright Fellowship in Nepal. And her research has been covered by many media outlets, including National Geographic, NPR, and BBC. And something that I found interesting, looking at her LinkedIn page, is that she's founder of a company called Science in the Wild, which is an adventure, travel, and expedition company that leads immersive and educational science expeditions around the world. That sounds really neat. So with that, we are excited to hear her talk today about the art of science storytelling. Take it away, Ulyana. Thank you.
All right, can you guys all hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you for that intro. No pressure, gosh. All right, let me share my screen here for you guys online. Welcome. And for those who are here, thank you. Okay. Now, hold on, I did not hit share screen, did I? Okay.
Now we can see it.
Perfect. But wait, now I have too many things going on my screen here. How do I fix that? More, hide, right? All the floating stuff. Okay. And I'll make, yeah. Okay, is that gonna look okay for you guys too? Perfect. Okay, great. Yeah, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much. So I've been doing these kinds of workshops for a couple of years now. So the Voices for Science program started actually last April and is ending this April. So it's kind of this 1 year tenure. And they take me through a lot of this kind of training too. So I want to pay it forward and kind of share what I've learned through this. Use some examples from my own research, kind of show you examples of what I'm talking about too, if it can be applied. Now, a lot of this stuff is for general public, but it can also be applied to stakeholders, partners, other scientists. You might not want to simplify it as much as I'm going to show you, but you could take, some of these tactics and try to apply them. So I'll show you some examples of that. All right, so really, when it comes down to communication, we really respond well to visual. Okay, so we're all inherently visual communicators, even though some might like numbers or word processors more. We really do start with the visual from a young age. And so I don't know if you guys have ever worked with science illustrators, but that's something that I've been exploring now too, a way to really communicate climate, right? Because that's something that's really a hot topic. Everyone wants to know about it. Not everyone responds well to how scientists present data. So Olivia is actually one of the co-leads for the Voices for Science. So this is her graphic, which is hilarious. But the reality is that everyone forgets and no one is listening, especially you guys on Zoom right now, like doing other stuff in the background. But this is the reality, right? It's like you'll probably remember 25% of what I say. So we want to make sure that some of these things stick. And there's a book actually called Made to Stick. So I suggest that one. It's a really good one for like learning about some of these tactics. But the reality is you only have 10 minutes max to really capture someone's attention, 90 seconds per slide. But this is going to be 50 minutes, maybe 40, depending. So how do I do that? Okay, so if presenting virtually or in person, you can split up the presentation into these segments. And what I mean by that is, so for example, 30-minute, 3 segments, 1 hour, 6. But what does that actually look like? Okay. Telling an anecdote. Okay, so I don't know if you guys ever seen on Twitter #FieldFails or seen those. Look them up, they're hilarious because scientists who work out in the field oftentimes have funny things happen and people respond to that. That's the stuff that kind of people resonate with, stories, right? So telling anecdotes, stopping, asking for questions, and then doing some kind of activity. Now, This is more for the virtual world, which we all have experience with now for the last few years. Breakout rooms, right? It seems to work to break up and have discussion about some key points. And other virtual platforms we've explored, like Padlet, ways where you can like write on these kind of virtual post-its. There's all sorts of kind of tools out there that you can use depending on what fits. But the important point here is segment switches, okay, so to keep attention. And then knowing your audience, okay? So demographics obviously are a great start, but you need to connect with them, okay? Try to understand them on a personal level. This really applies to those of us who work with stakeholders and partners, right? Like, so we come from one background, they're from another. See if we can understand them more. We have James Rattlingleaf, at the NC CASC, working with Indigenous peoples, and so really trying to understand from his perspective, and then how we can apply that to our own communication. So for example, also here, something that's relevant in the North Central region, right? Lots of drought. Farmers want to know about this and what they can do about it. So polar bears aren't going to really cut it. This is my picture from the Arctic. I took this, I have a really cool story I can tell you about it, but if it's not going to apply, to the audience, then all it does is impress them. But are you there to impress them, or are you there to educate them? Okay, so also knowing why they're there. What do you think they're going to get out of it, right? It's not about you being the smartest person conveying stuff. It's about what are they going to be getting out of that presentation. So really be thinking about that and why they're coming to hear you. So why did you guys come here? Somebody can offer up. What are you hoping to get out of this? Yeah, exactly. See, so there it is. Hopefully the description, and then all that kind of falls into line there. And then also, are you a willing participant? Or are you a captive audience, the mandatory attendee? This is a bit of a situation analysis. Okay, so sometimes when you have seminars, you're kind of forced to go to, right? So the person delivering the presentation should also kind of get an idea of what that might look like. And then what do you want them to do? Okay, so what, right? I want you guys to get some tactics that you can take moving forward. So make sure there's a clear understanding. Okay, so again, this is case dependent. If you're talking to stakeholders, at the end of this, we want to collaborate, right? Something like that. And so I have a little cheat sheet for that. Okay, so obviously this can be expanded. You can add in all your own stuff. But this is one that's been taken from SciComm workshops in the past. Write down a word or two that you want to use in defining your why. I want to what action, okay? So there's a whole slew of those. But again, you don't have to use this specific one, but just be thinking about what you want to do. Today, I want to inform you. Hopefully entertain you a little bit with stories and things like that. But that's what I want to do, so that my audience will do some call to action. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of calls to actions there. Again, you can add your own. You can really just, anytime you try to do a presentation, just be really thinking about this, kind of templating it beforehand. And so right now I'm actually getting ready to also do a webinar, a virtual one, and it is on the Arctic, right? So it's about selling a trip. Okay, so that's a very different type of audience and a very specific call to action. So again, be thinking about, so collaborate obviously is a big one for us, here in the sciences. Fund, okay, right? If we're talking people on the Hill, understand or support, work with us. So again, what is that call to action? And then figuring out how do you best reach them. This has been obviously changing through the years since when I first went into college to where it is now. Like there's so many more tools available and it's kind of hard to keep up, right? You have to also know that people vary in how they prefer to receive information. So at the NC CASC, we're trying a whole bunch of things to see kind of what sticks. Some groups really like Facebook, for example. We don't get them a big following on Facebook, but we still have it for those that might want to use it. Twitter is starting to grow, so we're starting to put more on there. Handouts, okay, handouts that are nice, kind of graphic 2-pagers, right? So with Chelsea there, we were working on. So again, what your audience wants, how they're going to receive that information, and then QR codes. So there's a little blog there on how do you make those, right? So people can just come up with their phone and scan, but not everyone has a phone. What if you go to some place like at the Alaska Climate Research Center up in Alaska, they might not have that. Okay, so how do they respond to the information? Having a physical handout, something like that is important. So again, kind of assessing what the need is. This also says the setup of the room, right? Like if I want to have a discussion-based one, more interactive, we would change the setup of the room so that you guys could be interacting more, and availability of those materials. Again, like this is going online, for example, so then you'll have access to it on YouTube. All right, so then what is your message? Okay, so a list of facts won't be retained, but you need to include them. So how in the world do you do that, right? This is always a challenging part because it's not just the story either, not just to entertain, okay? It may contain story as an emotional connection, because that we find oftentimes increases engagement and retention. I kind of have a similar look right now here because I went and climbed a 14er this weekend, so I have the sunburn. But this is an accident that happened on an expedition. And I kind of just took this picture afterwards just to remind myself. And then when I posted it online, this, more than the science I was doing, is what generated the attention. And so I went back and edited the post to be like, all right, well, here's what the science story is behind it. So we're climbing this remote volcano in Chile. And there's a lot of pollution that's floating around in the air. And a lot of it does end up on snow and ice on glaciers, you know, in the Arctic, Antarctica, even in the high peaks. So this is a really remote place in the Atacama Desert, and then up to about 20,000 feet. And so we're sampling snow going up there. And then we were trying to get to the top of this peak because there's actually really interesting life forms, extremophiles, that live in the volcano. So we wanted to collect some of these samples for a researcher actually here at CU. Well, I didn't get there. The weather turned, so we're like the winds were so fierce. We're like, all right, we have to turn around. We can't do the astrobiology part of the project, but we can collect snow. So it turned around and started glaciating, you know, just taking the ice axe down the slope, and lost control. I'm a mountaineer. I know how to do this. I could not self-arrest, which means kind of putting the pick into the side of the mountain. So I went tumbling for about 1,000 feet, not into the volcano on the other side, fortunately. And then when I kind of landed like this, and then some of my team members came up to me like, "Are you okay? Okay?" And all I said was, "Snow sample." That's what I came there for. And I'm like, I can't have this ridiculous accident, you know, like not having to fulfill the science goals. So telling this whole story and then saying we were looking at impacts of pollution in this remote volcano, like people really connected to it. And then they learned the science along the way. I don't like to say we're sneaking in the science because we shouldn't sneak, but right. But we integrated it into a story. Or people might relate. They might say, "Oh yeah, the time I climbed, or I did that," and that people started commenting. So narrative, compelling, memorable, in my case, painful. All right. So there's also studies been done with the brain that say that the most success that you're going to get between the speaker and listener's brain is when you're telling that story. Okay, so this shows a scan of the brain at rest with a certain word, paragraph, but then an intact story connects all these pieces. I don't claim to understand what all this is showing. I just know that this is from this lab here that shows the right and left hemispheres and what lights up and when you tell a story. So basically, all these little components are lining up to connect a story with what the science may have been. Pollution on a volcano, and she fell, and that kind of thing. Okay, so this is kind of dated at this point. Still a good one, though. Identifying the essential elements of effective science communication. What do the experts say? And yeah, tools of storytelling. Because when you think about humanity, tens of thousands of years ago, all around, you know, the fires, you know, telling stories, and you know, there's the myths, right? And trying to explain our natural world. That was a natural way of trying to convey information. So it makes sense that our brain still responds to those kinds of stories. And again, it's not about simplifying it to the point of I don't like the term, but dumbing it down, but it's just, again, making connections that people are going to resonate with and actually remember. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of examples of this. So this is from my own PhD research. So the power of visuals. Okay, so this is an archival photo. Anybody happen to know where this might be? I'm curious. So this is Mount Everest, but it's from the Tibetan side, because most people know it from the Everest, from the Nepal side. But back when it was trying to be climbed in the 20s, there's a lot of imagery that was taken, which now, with how climate has been changing, is absolutely valuable information. So this is called the Main Rumbook Glacier. And then That's it in 2008. Same season. So again, power of visuals and scale here. As you can see, that there's a lot less snow, obviously, in the top of the mountain. And then the vertical drop of glaciers. People often talk about retreating glaciers and advancing, but in mountain or alpine glaciers, they deflate, they get thinner. And so this shows it. And again, in the Himalaya, it's impossible to really understand that scale if I don't put those measurements in there, right? So it's, again, you can just see that stunning drop. But these numbers, yeah, 200, 300 feet. I have it in meters too. I cater it to different audiences and also try to find good analogies depending on where I'm speaking. So Statue of Liberty is 305 feet. Okay, so you might not understand like what 300 feet looks like, but you think about the Statue of Liberty. Okay, that gives you a sense of like, wow, that's a big loss. That's a big thing. Okay, so when I give this presentation in the UK, it's Big Ben instead. Okay, so you can kind of think of all the different examples you can use depending on your audience. Okay, so this kind of map, it shows different glaciers. It shows how it thinned between these different maps. Not so easy to understand. Plus, you put up that number. This is important, again, for science talks. You want to give numbers, you want to be quantitative. But then you can take it one step further, right? So you have that, but then again, put it to something that's more relatable. That volume loss is the equivalent of 400,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So again, like you could probably picture that kind of pool, and then we can imagine 400,000 of those. That's how much volume loss there's been in those 90 years. Okay, so again, there's something called the measure of things. It's a webpage, and that's what I often use. I'm like, okay, here's my volume, or here's my size. Right now, I'm working on a writing piece that I needed, like, what's the equivalent of this many square miles? The city of Rome or the city of London. I'm like, oh, that's relatable. So you can use that webpage too. So are you already looking it up? Yeah. Yeah, so that's a really good one to try to find like common things to relate to people. Sometimes comes and goes though. That webpage wasn't working for me about a month ago, and then it just worked today. So just so you know. Okay. And then again, comes back to knowing your audience. So there, and that imagery, I guess my action was I want to shock. Okay, that was kind of more like, whoa, in that time frame, that's how much loss there was. And then again, putting it to something a little more relatable, because again, numbers don't always kind of resonate until you put it to something that's more relatable. Okay. Another thing, and I was guilty definitely of this as I was just going into the sciences, is busy slides and distractions. And you tried to find Waldo, didn't you? So oftentimes when you're looking on a slide, you might have a lot of things going on. It might be important because you need this information, but one of the things you can do is just split it up into multiple slides or different animations and have things kind of come up one at a time so the people, you'll drive the focus where you want it. Right, because oftentimes some people who are visual are just going to look at the visual and be looking like for Waldo, and then they're missing totally what I'm saying. Or other people really like to read, and they'll get distracted by reading, and then won't be looking at the graphic you're referring to. So again, it's kind of if you need a busy slide, just split it up. I just split it up and animate the pieces that you want. Okay, and then when creating slides, I am a Star Wars fan. All right, do or do not. There's no try. All right, let's go through a few of the do's and don'ts. Okay, so staying concise, right? Just trying to keep things to a minimum on a slide, or again, like you see me doing right now, animating it, just to drive your attention. Using stories and anecdotes, already gone over that. If it applies, I mean, it might not depending on what you're doing, but there is something, I guarantee you can find something that is relatable if you think about it. And then being direct about what you're trying to convey. I gave a presentation recently, in December, where I just tried a different tactic, where I just started with results. I'm like, so if you guys can't stay online, because this was in Nepal, there were power outages coming on like every 10 minutes, the presentation would go dark and then come back. And so like, okay, this is a situation analysis now. Like, so let me just start with the conclusions. So if it cuts out, you guys know exactly like what the conclusions were, and then we'll kind of backtrack. So you can try different tactics like that. If you have a limited amount of time, limited attention spans, same thing. Okay, so one of the things we do not want to do is overdo the special effects, which I'm doing on purpose kind of now, animating all this. Just reading the slides again, which is what I'm doing. But if you do want to do that, you can just animate them slowly too. It all depends, because sometimes you get nervous right? And you don't have your notes. When you're sharing a screen, you cannot have your notes. And so like when I've done Zoom virtual, I've had one computer in here, reading from that one, just because it's too much information sometimes and you want to convey it. And then overusing statistics too. If you want to use statistics, I'm going to show you some of the graphics you can use instead. Again, this could be working with a science illustrator or just trying your hand at designing some of these things. So presenting data is the thing we do as scientists. Okay, telling the truth, nothing commands like credibility. And no stretching of anything, just kind of just show it. It is what it is. And then if someone wants access to the entire data set, GitHub, right, that's a great place. You guys probably used GitHub. Ty, you probably certainly use GitHub all the time. So yeah, I'm making stuff available for people if requested. And when we're publishing, oftentimes they make us do that anyhow. But just having that ready to go also. Be ready to answer questions, obviously, about your conclusions too. This is all basic stuff, but getting to the point, okay, articulate the conclusion you want your audience to adopt. Okay, this is a sales example. That's kind of a good one. So your first impression on this chart, for example, is, wow, look at that growth and recovery. But that's not what the speaker wants you to focus on. They want you to focus on the fact, why did it go down in that month? Okay? But you're not going to know that if you don't guide your viewer towards it. So again, that's just putting a spot and an arrow that shows you, all right, this is what you should focus on. Okay. And again, that's something that can be done as an animation, just kind of bring in that arrow. Actually, here's the point. And then picking the right tools. Okay, so again, depending on the data you're showing, pie charts, that's for large differences in proportions. Bar charts, visually more precise. Larger data sets you can stack. So again, thinking about how best to show your data is also the trick, right? There's just kind of seeing what fits. And that takes a while. I think that takes the longest. Is if I read a paper, like typically a lot of us, we just don't have time to read an entire paper. We'll read an abstract, then we'll read the figures and the captions. And if we can't understand it, then it's not well done, right? So you should be able to understand that paper just from the abstract, and then also just from the figures. It should be standalone, explainable. And so really try to spend the time on building your visual graphics like that. And also the contrast, right? So there's different ways to do that. I really like to use different color schemes, but you also have to be thinking about people who might be colorblind. Okay, so actually my nephew is. So I was like, hey, can you see this? I didn't understand, what that was like and what colors you could and couldn't see. And so that kind of helped me think about, okay, what kind of contrast can I use that's inclusive, for people who may not be able to see. But the contrast does really bring out data. And it doesn't always have to be colors. It could be bolded, as you see here as well. But anything that really helps it to stand out. And then powerful imagery, okay, for calls to action. So one of the things I've been doing at the NCCast, kind of introduced this, was little videos. I'm an amateur, making these videos, but it's been kind of fun to communicate the science, what the NCCast has been doing visually like this. So this, you guys might recognize what this might be. It's from the Marshall Fire. Okay, this is this was last year in Louisville. I have some friends who live there. Were able to give me closer access so I could take some imagery and film, with the permission, and then turn that into a Future of Fire video for one of our postdocs. I think Jill Marie, you're watching, so yeah, for her project. And so using this kind of powerful imagery to evoke an emotion also can be done. Choosing the right kind of music as well. I do a whole thing on science video making, so if anyone wants and requests that, I can also do another seminar on that. That's a fun one. And then the creation of, again, these compelling visuals, infographics, right? If you're seeing what you want to kind of emphasize here, they're talking about the availability of water, right? So drinking water. I need water right now, ironically so. So they show like how many liters do you need to barely survive, marginal to actually being healthy. So this is kind of a neat way to put all those numbers into a nice visual, showing only this 1%, right? Is the surface of groundwater. And if people do respond really well, or making things really big, try to make things really big and stand out if you do need to put a number in there. Okay, and then also illustrating the statistics. The world's deadliest animals, right? Number of people that get killed per year. People are always, this always happens around when Shark Week comes on Discovery Channel. You're like, oh, sharks. Look at 10 shark deaths, okay? And when you compare that to human on human, and then mosquitoes, the disease vectors, right? that really helps put into perspective, where we should be focusing our efforts when it comes to this kind of thing, number of people killed. So this kind of graphic, again, you need to just be thinking about how to visually illustrate this. And again, working with someone who's a pro in this, like I'm not a graphics designer. I have an idea and I'll work with someone to come up with some of this, even for the NC CASC right now. And then also for maximum impact using actual photos. Okay, so there's stock photos. Sometimes we have to use those. Like I try to go out and get as much footage as I can for video pieces I'm doing for the CASC. Like there's a grasslands project right now. So going out and, filming the grasslands, trying to use as much of our own, either from our team or my own. Like this, for example, there were tornado warnings in my neighborhood in Broomfield. And so it's like, wait, what? Tornado? And I ran outside and I'm like, oh crap, I saw that. And so again, this was a short little blog piece I put online for the public. And they're like, whoa, that was near you? Like you saw that? Again, that kind of personal connection. So if you guys are out in the field and you're doing that, or with your team, try to get as much footage. There's never too much. We had a group or a team that went to Glacier National Park and collected so much good stuff that I was able to kind of piece together some of that into a piece about a research reel for them. So again, that your own footage as much as possible. And if you can't, if you guys know about Creative Commons, that's a place where you can go, and get the royalty free. And this is all educational use, so it's a lot simpler to use. And then for music, that's also the tricky one for when you're trying to put together maybe a short reel or a piece. Artlist is what I use for that one. So it is a paid subscription, but you can pay depending on how much you need. But that one, you have so many options and instrumental, right? Because we're trying to do a voiceover, you don't want lyrics on top of that, and trying to talk about science. So, but that's a nice way to just gently in the background have some nice music. Okay, so here's a thing to remember, that your research is a contribution, right, to science. And it's not animating. Your explanation is the gift. Okay, so the more powerful, the more we can do this, the better off we're going to be, because again, it is ultimately about our audience, right? You could be doing this amazing research, but if you can't communicate it, if you can't communicate it, find someone who can, though. Right? That's why you have a team, a communications team at all the different centers, and you can always reach out also. So, like, how do I turn this into something compelling? So again, thinking about what your objective is, what the call to action before you even start making the presentation. And this does apply for scientific talks as well, right? So it's not just for general public, but you can think about what you're going to be doing at a conference presentation. So I wanted to kind of pivot here. I want to also leave enough time for questions, but kind of give you an example. Right, so just, what was it? A month ago, I was down in Antarctica. And so I'm an expedition guide. So I work part-time at the CASC, and then I'm also an expedition guide. And so one of my jobs on the ship is to also communicate what the people are seeing down in Antarctica and the Arctic, all these different places. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of things that I put together for a public talk, and kind of ask you now what you think it is according to what you learned. Okay, so this one was called Wonderful World of Ice. And that is actually a picture from Baffin Island, all right, just to the west of Greenland. So again, starting off a post with this picture, people are already looking at the blue ice and the skis and already kind of maybe curious about what this is. So again, we're looking at pollution impacts up there. All right, so the Swiss Alps is where it all began for me as a 6-year-old. That's me with my brothers and mom, dad taking the picture. First time up to 10,000 feet. I think that's why I fell in love with mountains and became ultimately a mountaineer who wanted to study ice. And then that kind of morphed into climate and climate change impacts. So it kind of had this imprinting impact on me. So what is this example of? This slide here. What's the example? What am I kind of using to draw in an audience with this slide? Yeah, the emotion. Oh yeah, when I was a kid, you might be thinking about how maybe you got interested in whatever you're doing, right? So start off with the story. And then I had this picture. This was not an intentional picture. These are not my brothers either, but these are my colleagues. When I was 21, I got the chance to work on an icebreaker down in Antarctica, and that was it for me. I want to study ice. I want to be doing these kinds of expeditions. So again, going back and forth here, where it began, and then just 15 years later, fulfilling a dream like that. I'm even holding snow in there. It's just kind of funny, like it imprints on you. So again, this is another story of emotion and kind of like seeing how a story of a life unfolds and relates to the research. So some people might react to that. Okay, so people might also be thinking about, well, how big is Antarctica? I get that question so much, so I finally put a slide together. Okay, so, and it covers usually the audience, Australia, Europe, and the US. So this is power of analogy or scale, right? Scale and analogy. This really helps people to visualize just how big it is. It's always on the bottom of the map, spread out, depending on the projection. So this is great, okay? So this is an analogy scale. Okay. And then an anatomy of a glacier, also called a river of ice. So analogy, again, I use the story of a bank account, gaining and losing. You want it to be gaining, obviously, more than losing. A couple of key terms there, the scientific terms, where it accumulates and ablates. But again, kind of a simplified cartoon version. I didn't draw this one, obviously, but you can draw simple cartoon ones too. This one I pulled from the internet on the ship. So slim pickings, this is too busy. For most people who are trying to understand what is going on, this is too busy. So this is an example of one maybe I don't want to do, or maybe I can kind of block out some of the terminology or make my own, where the point I'm trying to make here, what is it, right? And so it's the fact that ice shelves break off because of a warming ocean below and wave action from the loss of sea ice. But you're not going to get that from this graphic, right? So this is an example of what kind of is not a great one to use, but you can still build a story if you simplify it into chunks. And kind of, again, get people to focus on it. So you can use things, that for education purposes, but build it into your kind of own way, or kind of break it up for people to understand what is the messaging. It is so unclear here, right? So this came out from the BBC when we were down in Antarctica. So I was able to pull this graphic. So it's showing sea ice at its lowest extent. So 2017 was the lowest until 2022 beat that, and then 2023. Okay, so again, people might not understand what's the importance of sea ice. What is sea ice? It's the frozen ocean that reflects solar radiation. It's super important in the polar regions, and we're losing it. We're exposing the ocean, which will absorb more heat and creating this positive feedback. So this is an important graphic, super important for what's going down in Antarctica right now. But people might not really resonate with this versus something like this. Okay, now obviously this is the BBC's audience, all right? So they're going to focus on their region. But this is the difference in sea ice extent between the minimum this year and the average minimum. So almost 1 million square kilometers are gone that should be down there. Okay, so that's the size of the UK there. So again, it's to their audience, but you can do something similar, like with the measure of things. And a lot of people might respond more to this visual than this graphic. Okay, but you can put up both, because some people like this. The scientists, I'm already like thinking, wow, I like this. But realizing for a public audience, they might be like, oh wow, that's a lot of ice. Right, that's a better visual for them. Okay, and then this is also trying a graphic. A picture. Okay, importance of sea ice, albedo is how it reflects. We already talked about that, how things happen in the ocean, but then life. Okay, sea ice is really important for algae. Algae grows underneath it, okay? Just as it's pictured here. And then the krill, or little shrimp, will eat it, and the seals eat that, the penguins eat that, and the whales. So this is the start of the food chain and the polar regions. Okay, so again, kind of emphasizing what's the emphasis here? It's on life, but in reality, when this slide was used, it was animated and doing other things. But this is an example of using one of those photos and kind of being like, what is the driving kind of the question, like, why is this so important? Life. Okay. I don't know so much about the biology. I'm more the physical scientist, but again, just at least putting it out there. And there were experts who were listening in on this who could actually add in more information. And so I was stimulating conversation. There's the call to action to collaborate with people who might have more knowledge on this. Okay, and then I'm going to finish on this. So do you guys know the story of the Andes survivors? Who does not? Okay, so briefly I'll go over. So in 1972, there was a rugby team flying from Uruguay to Chile for a match. And then the plane crashed on the border with Chile and Argentina. And so 45 people were on board, and there were only 16 survivors, 72 days after the crash. Okay, so the story is famous in a book and movie called Alive, because how did they survive? They ate the bodies of the dead. Okay. So an intense experience. This is a team that was used to like low elevation, right? Not 12,000 feet up on a glacier in the mountains, and they survived for the 72 days. So this is my husband, Ricardo, with one of the survivors, the bottom of them. Okay? My husband was out climbing at the site. He wanted to see where the impact was, like what happened. And so he went up this gully and he found a coat kind of buried amongst the rocks. It was a particularly dry year. And so it was just kind of sticking out of the rocks. And she's like, what is this? So he kind of carefully looks and he finds a wallet, passport, and it had the name Eduardo Strauss on there. So hopefully you can see that on there. And it happened to be one of the 16 survivors. So he brought down the wallet because he knows it's going to disintegrate. It had been out there for like 30 years. And then they got connected and Eduardo thanked him a lot. And he's like, but can you bring the coat? And so for the next 2 years, there was way too much snow. So this is an area that gets really affected by El Nino, La Nina patterns. And so the next 2 years kind of were in an El Nino, so there's too much precipitation. And then finally transitioned to a dry year and he was able to get the coat back. And now it's in display in a museum. But then the interesting thing is this is an incredible survival story, but there's also a story of what the glacier is doing. Okay. This is the glacier in 1972. You see this, all the snow on there. I'm blocking the year there, but you see it's 2018. So that's me with the front wheel. So you see the front wheel there. The fuselage got lost a long time ago. It fell into a crevasse, got squished and is somewhere down the glacier. But look at that glacier. That is still a glacier, but it's covered in rock. And so it has this kind of protective, this is called the debris covered glacier. And so it's almost unrecognizable though, right? So in 50 years time, we're seeing an incredible change. No one would study this glacier were it not for this accident, right? So it's one of those, again, remote places, very hard to get to. You got to take 4x4 vehicles, horseback, on foot, at altitude, and then get down into the surface. And there's a lot of stuff melting out. So this was the fuselage in 1972. I'm going to show you a couple of images since then. So that was in 2006. And so my husband went, and you can see this not that much changed quite yet. You can see a crevasse, the crack there in the foreground. The background rock there we could just call submarine rock because it's kind of a reference. You can see how things are changing. So not too drastic yet, but then look at that huge switch. Okay, so we have actually photos from every year, but just to kind of just show you here in 2018. Again, there's ice under there, but it's just stunning how much it's dried out and shrunk. In fact, like 30 to 40 meters of vertical drop in about just 50 years. And this was just recently our trip in December of 2022. If you look carefully, you can see some wheels. I can't point on here for the people online, but these wheels right here. So that's the landing gear, and you can still see kind of the dirty ice there. And so when I was talking about all this on the ship, there was a story of, this incredible survival of these 16 of the plane crash, and then a story of change of how the glacier is revealing, what's happening with climate change on full display, right? People respond to the visual. They're seeing evidence of this crash melting out that had been buried for many, many years and now is melting out. But the point here to connect the emotional part is that these young men survived the impossible, right? Like no one expected them to be able to survive. They did what it took. They worked as a team. And when we think about climate change, it seems again like an insurmountable challenge for humanity. It's an existential threat in multiple ways. But I always think about this example of how these young men survived and figured it out with teamwork. So kind of the messaging I use here is about we can do the same, right? So kind of ending on this kind of hopeful note, using the imagery, using the story, bringing in some of the signs of change, and then kind of ending on that hopeful note when it comes to climate. So this was a story that really resonated with the audience because again, they can see it, they'll hear a story that's just like, well, a lot of people, older generation had heard of the story, and then bringing in a personal connection now to it. So that is what I have for you. beautiful image here of just like how thin our atmosphere is and how precious life is. And we're all, I think most of us here are working on climate related things, but whatever we're working on, whatever the science is important, and communicating it is important. And hopefully some of these strategies and tactics help. And I'm happy to answer questions now. And I also work right across over there. I mean, I'm mostly remote, but yeah, I'm around. So if you guys want other kinds of thoughts and ideas on communicating, happy to do it. But I think I left enough now for questions. All right, and I will stop sharing here. Okay, I can't figure. Also, so I can see you guys, if you guys have questions. See if there's anything in the chat. Ah, nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just say thank you, Ulyana. And I'd say maybe you can just call on people that are in person there for questions. Then happy to help here in the chat as well from people online.
Okay. Yeah. Hi.
All right. I have a question, I guess, about the hero's journey. Right? So there's this joke that there's only one story ever, which is the hero's journey. You have a person and they struggle with something and then achieve it.
Right.
And this is great for, and you gave a couple of examples of the hero's journey in your stories. But then this becomes a problem a little bit with sort of extractive science or collaborations between cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's like, white scientists came in and saved indigenous community with amazing science, that's not sort of the story. So I'm just curious, how do we either adapt the hero's journey, or is there another story structure that we can adapt? It's like a little more collaborative, a little less extractive.
Yeah.
And a little more like, I'm the triumphant scientist.
Great point. Yeah. So the question for those who couldn't hear online is about kind of more collaborative when you're working, especially with other cultures versus extractive in the hero's journey. And so, in fact, there's a paper that just came out in Nature Climate Change yesterday with James Ranelagh-Leaf, and it was all about co-production and co-communicating it. This is something that I'm actually really interested in. So I am just learning about how to do this. I work with many different cultures. I work with Sherpas in Nepal, and it was never about me coming in and saving. They had scientists coming in doing that. They were integrated into the process. And their stories were just as important. So any kinds of public talks that I gave, it was always with someone, from that culture as well, and giving them the platform as well. I think that's super important. And yeah, we don't want to be seen as, the saviors, and and especially like the example of the rugby team. They're from South America, completely different culture, and it was all very interesting for me to see like how they worked as a team. I'm just thinking about in America, how in the northern America, how might that have worked out? Would have devolved into something different. So that was interesting. So really taking the time to listen to those stories is important. First of all, we come in, we don't just come in blazing. We listen to the stories, and then we bring them into the fold, co-presenting. And then there's something I wanted to actually. There's a tool called PIP decks, and they are storyteller tactics as well. So I highly recommend it. I can send out a link for those if you're interested, but they specialize in that kind of thing, like how you can actually integrate different story tactics other than that hero's journey. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Very, very important, very timely.
Yeah, this is more of a comment than a question, but
do you want to come closer so maybe they can hear?
oh yeah.
Sorry.
I was just responding to that question in the chat about for other videos, readings, or trainings.
Mm-hmm.
And wondering if you mentioned a bunch of things during
Yes.
your presentation. Would you be able to send out kind of a list of some of those
Totally.
that you think are most important?
Yeah, so the question is about creating kind of a compiled list. I am known for making my cheat sheets for everything. So I'll be happy to send out a comms cheat sheet, the things I've learned, kind of a 2-pager that has these references, and absolutely, yes. So that's Joshua, yes. And then I guess you guys can distribute if I send it to you. Yeah. Happy to do that, because again, this is about paying it forward, not just me like training, but it's just like you guys and taking what you learn and applying it is kind of the end goal here. And that was the Voices for Science program too. It was all about teaching us skills and then spreading it. So this is super important. And Ty's point is so important too, about not just us, but like all the communities and cultures we're working with. Always learning. Okay, I think I'm going to end on time then. Anything else from online? Oh, yes.
Can you tell the polar bear story?
The polar bear story?
Oh,
Oh my goodness. Okay. Stop recording. No, okay. So I was, I guess you can say interning with this company in 2019 up in Svalbard. So it's about 600 miles from the North Pole. Everything been going great. You get like rifle training, you know, you have to, it's the law up there to carry a rifle. You never want to shoot to kill because it's an endangered species, right? But you have to have the protection also. So this was, I think it was like my second to last day, and I'm like, oh, I had no encounters. This is great, you know. And then so we're walking near this hut and telling the history about the hut, who was using it, you know, what kinds of Arctic exploration was going on. And then we're walking to a place where a couple of weeks ago I'd seen little cute Arctic fox pups. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to show the people this. So I'm walking towards it, and I see a patch of white, and I'm like, there wasn't snow here before. Where are those foxes? And then I just like stop in my tracks. I'm like, that's not snow. There's no foxes, and that's a bear. It's sleeping. Okay, back away. You know, it's not awake yet. And then it woke up. And you just see how massive this bear is. And it's just, you know, you've probably seen them in zoos and other stuff, but when you see it in the wild like that, like, this is a wild bear that's in its environment. And, you know, the winds are blowing this way. So it's like, okay, it hasn't caught our scent yet. Then the winds shifted. We're like, oh no, it gets up, you know, and it's sniffing the noses in the air. And then we're quickly getting everyone evacuating, calling on radios quietly. And I don't want that blasting. And we're able to evacuate safely. But yeah, the adrenaline, I'm even feeling it right now of that was pretty intense. It's amazing because you see a creature, you know, in its natural environment, and, you know, it's happy to see it was healthy. Yeah. But again, that just really brings to mind like how powerful nature and wildlife is, and how much you should respect and observe at a distance. Yeah. But there's lots of stories that we had a leopard seal in Antarctica that tried to like bite the Zodiac too, that had to be fended off because these Zodiacs that we use are inflatable rafts. No, they're a ton, 2,000 pounds. So they're quite robust. But when you see a big seal with big teeth coming from below trying to get at it, it's and we're doing a science project, you know, with a disc in the water, like, please don't bite that and bite that off. So there's just so many interesting encounters you have. And that's why I love both kinds of jobs that I get to do, communicating the science here. There's stories here, you know, about drought and fire, ecology, like all this stuff is super important. And then there's the stuff I love in the polar regions that are also like kind of the, they're the indicators probably most powerfully of how the planet is changing. So I get to integrate all these things in my work and communicating to you guys and hoping that you take some of this, at least some of it, moving forward. So yes, I will get out that document. Any other questions? I'll put my contact information as well. If you have anything else. And then also I'm, like I said, around on occasion on campus as well. Okay, thank you so much.
That's fantastic, Ulyana. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you guys who are online. Nice to, well, I can't see you all, but thank you. Cool.